My name is Sarah Whitaker, and I was 38 years old when my brother made me pay for our mother's funeral, then looked me in the face in the middle of the visitation room and called me basically a guest, while the funeral home was still running my card for the flowers, the transport, and the final balance. I was standing near the front row at Hale & Sons Funeral Home in Louisville, Kentucky, wearing the white corsage I had paid for myself and for our mother's immediate family, holding the printed funeral program in one hand and a folder of invoices in the other, when my sister-in-law Lauren stepped in front of the reserved family pew and said there had only been enough seats for the immediate family. I thought she meant cousins were being moved. Then Jason, my older brother, came up beside her, adjusted his black tie like he was the man of the hour, and said, "Sarah, don't make this awkward. You're basically a guest today." He said it quietly, but not quietly enough. Aunt Marlene heard it. The funeral director heard it. 2 of Jason's co-workers heard it. I heard it with the kind of ringing clarity that only comes when grief and humiliation hit at the exact same time. Then he added the line that split something open in me. "You paid because you're good at bills. That doesn't make you the head of the family." Before I tell you how my mother's final letter, a life insurance beneficiary form, a funeral ledger, and a missing stack of memorial donations turned Jason's public grief into the most expensive lie he had ever told, tell me this. What time is it where you are right now? And where are you watching from? I want to know how far this story travels. Before I tell you what happens, when the daughter who handled hospice, medicine, bills, funeral deposits, and final paperwork gets pushed out of the front row like a stranger, and the son who wanted the eulogy, the sympathy, and the flowers learns that the woman he called a guest was the only one their mother trusted to carry the truth. Because that funeral was not the beginning. It was only the first time Jason said out loud what our family had been doing to me for years. I grew up in Louisville, in a house where responsibility had a female face and recognition had a male name. Our father left when I was 13 and Jason was 16, and from that day on, our mother, Evelyn Whitaker, worked 2 jobs, carried herself like breaking down was a luxury, and tried to keep our family from becoming a cautionary story in church whispers. Jason was the eldest son, and in Aunt Marlene's mind, that made him the emotional heir to everything. It did not matter that he was rarely on time, rarely prepared, and usually only present when there was a room full of people watching. It mattered that he was the son. Marlene liked saying, "A son carries a mother's name into the world." She said that even after our father left, even after my mother worked herself thin to keep the lights on, and even after Jason was old enough to know the difference between love and attention, but still chose attention every time. I became the practical daughter almost by accident, and then by design. I was the one who filled pill organizers when Mom's blood pressure got unstable. I was the one who sat in ER waiting rooms and translated discharge instructions into something she could manage when she got too tired to read closely. I was the one who paid the pharmacy balance when Jason said he was between checks. I was the one who learned billing codes, hospice timelines, Medicare deadlines, and end-of-life paperwork, because if I didn't, no one else would. Mom used to squeeze my hand late at night when the house was quiet and Jason had already left after one of his short, emotional visits, and say, "The person who stays after everyone leaves is the person I trust with the truth." When she said it, I felt loved. Years later, I would realize she was also warning me. I worked as a hospice billing coordinator, which meant I spent my days inside the part of grief most people try not to look at. Final statements, insurance carryovers, co-pays no one expected, funeral estimates, pharmacy balances, transport fees. I knew how ugly money becomes around death, not because money is evil, but because grief makes people want credit without cost, symbolism without paperwork, and memory without the invoice attached. That work made me capable. It also made me useful in ways my family exploited. Anytime Mom needed a new medication sorted, Jason called me. Anytime a hospice nurse asked who the contact person was, it was me. Anytime a utility bill needed to be forwarded after Mom got too weak to open her mail regularly, it came to me. Jason called himself the one there for Mom. But what he meant by there was that he came by, cried in the kitchen, told her he loved her, took a photo of them holding hands for Facebook, and then left before anyone asked who was paying for oxygen delivery or the in-home aid hours not fully covered. Lauren made it worse by turning his half-effort into a public halo. She posted photos with captions like, "Jason never left Evelyn's side," while I was the one on hold with hospice supply vendors correcting duplicate charges and arranging weekend refill authorizations. Aunt Marlene loved those posts. She sent them around to cousins as proof Jason was carrying his mother through the hardest season. I was carrying the actual season. They were carrying the narrative. 3 years before Mom died, she had one of the first real scares that made me realize we were not managing a chronic condition anymore. We were moving toward the long goodbye. She fell in her kitchen, hit the edge of the counter, and ended up hospitalized with complications from a condition Jason still described to friends as just her getting older. Jason promised we would split the emergency bill. I paid the balance because the hospital needed it before discharge, and Jason said he'd send his part when a commission cleared. It never cleared. Or maybe it did, and he just found something else to do with it. At the next family gathering, he told relatives, "I handled Mom's care scare." I was standing beside the deviled eggs when he said it. Aunt Marlene patted his arm like he had just returned from war. I said nothing because Mom was finally home and stable, and at that stage in my life, I still believed peace around her mattered more than truth around me. That belief cost me years. When Mom moved on to hospice, I became the default point person. Not by title, by gravity. Nurses called me, the pharmacy called me, the chaplain called me, the equipment company called me. Jason visited more often once the word hospice entered the story, because hospice gave his grief a stage and a timeline. He cried beautifully, I'll give him that. He said all the right things in rooms with witnesses. He told people, nothing matters more than family. Then one evening, after a nurse had just left and Mom was asleep, he stood in my kitchen and asked if I could cover the next hospice copay because things are tight at the shop right now. His shop, which was really just him and a friend doing residential contracting under a name bigger than the business ever was, had been tight for most of his adult life. I paid the copay. Then I paid the pharmacy gap. Then I paid the transport supplement after a rough night required a transfer that insurance only half covered. Lauren thanked me once by text with a heart emoji and the sentence, "You're so good at the boring stuff." The boring stuff. That was what my family called every invisible act that kept Mom comfortable. Not love, not sacrifice. Boring stuff. Mom knew, though. About 2 weeks before she died, on one of her clearer mornings, she asked me to sit alone with her. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her, and somehow more exact. She asked if Jason had finally started helping with the money. I did not lie, but I softened it. "Not really," I said. She closed her eyes for a moment and nodded like that answered several questions at once. Then she pointed toward the drawer of her nightstand and told me there was a letter there for me, sealed, and that if they ever make you stand outside my goodbye, I should open it. I laughed a little because I didn't understand what she meant. She didn't laugh. "Promise me," she said. I promised. I wish I had asked more. I wish I had understood. But when your mother is dying, every conversation feels like a room you don't want to leave. And some doors stay closed because you think there will still be another day. There wasn't. She died on a Thursday, just after dawn, with me beside her and Jason arriving 20 minutes later with tears already ready on his face. Lauren came in carrying coffee. Aunt Marlene came by noon and immediately started talking about what Jason will need to do now, as if my mother's body had not even cooled and she was already appointing him keeper of the family mythology. The funeral planning meeting happened the next afternoon at Hale & Sons, a funeral home I knew by reputation and paperwork before I knew by grief. Thomas Hale, the funeral director, was kind, steady, and professional in the way people in his line of work have to be if they want to survive watching families unravel for a living. He laid out the options gently: service, burial, flowers, transport, obituary placement, memorial cards, the whole familiar machinery of goodbye. Jason sat at the head of the table, speaking in big, emotional phrases about honoring Mom the right way. Lauren nodded beside him and took over whenever the conversation moved toward image. She wanted a larger floral arrangement. She wanted upgraded printed programs. She wanted a memorial donation box prominently placed near the guest book because Mom touched so many lives. When Thomas discussed deposit timing, Jason looked at me. Just looked. No words at first. That was the family way. Let Sarah catch the practical fall without making a scene about the push. Then he said, "Sis, can you just handle the deposit? I'm moving money around." I said, "How much are you putting in?" He inhaled like I had said something rude in church. Lauren touched his sleeve and said, "Today is about honoring Evelyn, not making this transactional." Thomas looked down at his folder the way professionals do when they don't want their face to reveal that they've seen this exact family pattern 100 times. I paid the funeral deposit. I signed the contract as payer because the home required a paying party to release arrangements. Jason promised in front of Thomas that we'd sort it out as family. That sentence should be printed as a warning label on every contract in America. Over the next 2 days, I corrected Mom's obituary because Lauren had accidentally left out one of Mom's sisters and listed a church committee she quit 10 years earlier. I paid the florist when the first check failed. I covered the corsages and transport add-ons. I handled the hospice balance call because somehow, even in death, the paperwork keeps calling the same person. Jason rehearsed his eulogy. Lauren practiced where the family would stand for photos. Aunt Marlene called relatives and made sure everyone understood that Jason, the eldest son, had taken charge beautifully. I didn't fight it because grief had a weight and shape all its own, and a part of me still thought there would be some natural moment when facts would surface on their own. There almost never is. The visitation started on Sunday afternoon. I arrived early, carrying the white corsages and the final program corrections in my bag. The funeral home smelled like lilies, coffee, and carpeted sorrow. Thomas met me near the office and quietly thanked me for getting the payment forms back so quickly. That's when he told me there was still a remaining balance due after services, and that memorial donations could be applied later if the family chose. I told him to give me the ledger after the service. That sentence mattered more than I knew, because while I was speaking to Thomas, Lauren was apparently speaking to 2 nieces about family seating. By the time guests started arriving, the front row was reserved for Jason, Lauren, their 2 children, Aunt Marlene, and Jason's in-laws. There was a single remaining seat near the side, which Lauren told me had already been promised to close family. I thought she was joking. Then Jason stepped over and called me a guest. A guest at my own mother's funeral, with the funeral contract signed under my name. A guest wearing the corsage I had paid for. A guest standing there while the son who hadn't paid the deposit took the first pew like an inheritance. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I moved to the second row on the end because Mom's casket was still in the room, and I refused to give them my dignity in exchange for their cruelty. But something in me changed seats, too. Something moved from loyalty into witness. Jason gave the eulogy. He spoke about being the child who stood by Mom through every hard season. He thanked Lauren for helping carry the burden. He thanked Aunt Marlene for supporting the family. He did not mention me until the final minute, when he said, "And thanks to my sister Sarah for helping with some of the paperwork." Helping with some of the paperwork. My hands went cold. I thought of the hospice calls, the bills, the deposit, the obituary corrections, the late-night medication runs, the final insurance forms, the white corsages, the flowers, the invoices, the funeral home meetings, the last hours beside Mom's bed. Paperwork. Around me, people nodded like he had been generous. After the service, Lauren stood near the memorial donation box, greeting people with damp eyes and a practiced expression. I noticed her lift envelopes from the box twice and slide them into her handbag before Thomas's staff had logged them. I noticed because I notice things. She caught me looking and smiled the way women smile when they think they can charm a witness into doubting herself. "Just organizing," she whispered. I said nothing, but I remembered. That evening, after the last relative left and I finally got back to my kitchen with the funeral flowers nobody else wanted, my phone buzzed. It was Thomas. He was apologetic. "Sarah," he said, "since you're the contract payer, I wanted to let you know there appears to be a discrepancy between the donation envelopes visible earlier and what was logged." My back went straight. "How many?" I asked. He told me enough to make my jaw tighten. He also emailed me the payment ledger because my name was on the account. That ledger showed what I already knew emotionally, but had not yet seen in black and white. Jason had paid nothing. Not the deposit, not the flowers, not the transport. Nothing. My card, my transfers, my corrections, my name. Then another line from Thomas hit harder. The family row seating chart was provided by Lauren. Family row seating chart. Even my place at the funeral had been organized as if exclusion were another decor choice. I opened my kitchen drawer and took out the sealed letter from Mom's nightstand. I looked at it for a long time before opening it, because some envelopes feel like the last door between what you hoped and what you already know. Inside was a handwritten letter and a photocopy of a life insurance beneficiary form. The letter began with, "If they make you stand outside my goodbye, open this and let the truth sit where they would not let you sit." I had to stop reading for a minute because the room blurred. When I kept going, Mom explained that years earlier, when Jason first started borrowing language about family without actually helping, she had taken out a small life insurance policy and named me sole beneficiary. She wrote that it was not meant to make me rich. It was meant to repay me for all the ways care emptied your hands while others emptied their mouths. She wrote that Jason loved loudly but did not always love responsibly. She wrote that I had been the one who stayed after everyone left. She wrote that if anyone called me selfish for taking what she intentionally left me, I was to remember that a daughter is not less family because her work is quiet. I sat there with Mom's letter in my lap, the white corsage still pinned to my black dress, and cried in a way I had not been able to cry at the funeral. Not because of the money, because she saw it. She had seen the whole pattern while she was alive and had tried, in the only way she could at the end, to give me back a seat in the story. The next morning, I filed the life insurance claim. I also emailed Thomas requesting a full itemized funeral ledger and a formal accounting of memorial donations. Then I sent Jason a short message asking when he planned to reimburse any portion of the funeral or the hospice expenses he had promised to split. He responded 3 hours later with one sentence, Today is not about money, Sarah. It was always about money when he needed me to pay, and never about money when I needed him to account for it. At 10:32 p.m., Jason called. He did not say hello.
What did you tell the funeral director?
His voice had that familiar panic edge, the one he used when charm had already failed and urgency was trying to arrive before consequences. I put him on speaker and opened a note on my phone. I asked for the ledger. Silence. Then he said, too fast, "Lauren needed the donation box cleared before you saw the logged amount." There it was. Panic confession. He heard himself and immediately tried to reverse. I mean, before the family got confused about the totals. Too late. I wrote it down. Lauren came on next, crying before words, which was strategic for her. "Sarah, please don't do this. Your brother is grieving." I looked at Mom's letter. So am I. Aunt Marlene grabbed the phone after that. "Risk a little pride," she said. "This family cannot look divided after Evelyn's funeral." I almost laughed. This family already looked divided when Jason called me a guest at my own mother's funeral. Jason took the phone back and said, "You helped with bills. That doesn't make you the head of the family." There it was again, the old hierarchy still trying to breathe. I told him he had 72 hours to return all donation envelopes, correct the lie that he had funded the funeral, reimburse his promised share of Mom's hospice and final expenses, and stop telling relatives I had only handled paperwork. Lauren said I was turning grief into accounting. I said, grief is not a receipt, but someone still had to pay the invoice. Then I hung up. Lauren's smear campaign began the next morning. She posted that some people turn mourning into a money issue because they cannot stand not being the center of attention. Aunt Marlene started calling cousins, saying I was jealous Jason gave the eulogy. Jason texted me that the insurance proceeds should be signed over for the family because he had represented Mom publicly. Represented Mom publicly. As if grief had a reimbursement rate tied to microphone time. He also sent a draft family reimbursement agreement, asking me to endorse the life insurance check once it arrived so he could settle costs. Costs he had not paid. I forwarded it to Dana Morris, the estate attorney I had met before through a family at work and later retained for my own quiet protections around Mom's affairs. Dana read the documents and said exactly what I needed to hear. Beneficiary designations are not a suggestion, she told me, and memorial donations are not family petty cash. That sentence steadied me. The private truth room happened at my kitchen table 2 nights later. Jason came first, angry enough to vibrate. Lauren came in with red eyes and a notebook she clearly thought made her look organized. Aunt Marlene arrived, prepared to supervise morality. Thomas joined by speakerphone for the first part to clarify funeral home records, and Dana remained on standby. On my table were the white corsage, the funeral contract, payment receipts, hospice balances, memorial donation discrepancy notes, Jason's texts asking me to pay, the family row seating chart, Mom's final letter, and the insurance beneficiary form. Jason looked at the documents and said, "This is sick." "No," I said. "This is what paid for your speech." Lauren flinched. Marlene said, "You are dishonoring your mother's memory." I picked up Mom's letter. "No, I'm finally reading what she wrote because the people who said they honored her pushed me out of the front row." Jason said the eulogy burden had been his. I slid the payment ledger across the table, and the financial burden was mine. He said I only helped with bills. I placed the funeral contract beside the family row's seating chart. They called me a guest at the funeral my card paid for. Lauren said the seating had just been tight. I placed the seating chart beside the corsage.
Tight enough for your parents and Jason's in-laws, not tight enough for the woman who signed the contract.
Thomas's voice came through the speaker, calm and even. For the record, Sarah Whitaker is listed as the contract payer and principal arrangement contact. Jason hated the word record. Men like him always do when records stop bowing. Then I asked Lauren directly about the donation envelopes. She started crying harder. "I was protecting them," she said. "Protecting who?" I asked. "Jason, the house, the kids, we're behind on bills." There it was. She had planned to use money given in my mother's memory to cover Jason's household problems. Aunt Marlene said it was all family money anyway. Dana, who had now joined on speaker, responded before I could. "No, Marlene, memorial donations are restricted funds once designated, and if the funeral home has a log discrepancy, those funds must be accounted for." Jason looked at Lauren like he wanted her to stop talking, and at me like he wanted me to disappear. Instead, he said the sentence that ended whatever softness I still had left for his excuses. Mom needed a son beside her name, not a spreadsheet. I held up Mom's letter and read a line aloud. "The person who stays after everyone leaves is the person I trust with the truth." Then I looked at him. Mom had a son beside her name. She left the truth with her daughter. The room went silent, not because the line was dramatic, because it was final. Dana then explained, in language even Jason could not pretend to misunderstand, that the life insurance proceeds belonged to me as designated beneficiary, not to the family, and that any attempt to pressure or deceive me into endorsing them over could be documented. I repeated my terms. Return the missing donation envelopes, correct the payment narrative, reimburse promised hospice costs, stop telling people I was jealous of the eulogy. Jason asked if I was really going to humiliate him over funeral money. I said, "No, you humiliated yourself when you stood at Mom's casket in a suit I probably helped pay for and called me a guest." The public truth room happened 4 days later in Dana's office, with Thomas present and a funeral home billing coordinator joining for the accounting portion. Present were me, Jason, Lauren, Aunt Marlene, Dana, Thomas, and the billing coordinator. Jason arrived wearing the same posture he wore at the funeral, like if he squared his shoulders enough, no one would question who the family was supposed to revolve around. Dana began by confirming the beneficiary form. Valid, signed, witnessed. Sole beneficiary, Sarah Whitaker. Jason tried to argue that Mom must have intended the money for the whole family. Dana simply pointed to the signed designation and then to the letter, which made her intent even clearer. Then Thomas reviewed the funeral ledger. Deposit paid by Sarah. Floral balance paid by Sarah. Transport fees paid by Sarah. Program correction charge paid by Sarah. Remaining balance outstanding, not paid by Jason. The billing coordinator then addressed memorial donations. A discrepancy existed between visible envelope intake and final logged count. Lauren admitted she had removed envelopes before formal logging for safekeeping. Dana asked where those funds were now. Lauren began crying. Jason said, "We can repay it." Dana said, "That was not my question." There is a unique power in a calm lawyer asking for a direct answer. Lauren finally admitted some of the money had been used temporarily toward a utility shutoff notice and one overdue car payment. Aunt Marlene gasped as if this was the first unethical thing she had ever seen, even though she had defended the whole family system for years. Dana explained that all memorial funds needed to be restored in full, accounted for, and either applied according to the family's formal agreement toward funeral costs or returned to the intended memorial purpose. Then came the face-slap-proof moment. Jason said again, Sarah only helped with bills. I placed the funeral contract beside the family row seating chart and Mom's letter. I paid the funeral deposit. I handled hospice. I corrected the obituary. I bought the corsages. I signed the paperwork. I was the one Mom trusted. And you called me a guest. Thomas lowered his eyes. The billing coordinator went very still. Aunt Marlene finally stopped talking. Dana then read one line from Mom's letter aloud at my request. If they make you stand outside my goodbye, open this and let the truth sit where they would not let you sit. Jason's face went white. Because in that moment, every hierarchy he had relied on cracked at once. The eldest son story, the public grief story, the generous family story, the story where I was just the boring bill girl. All of them died right there under fluorescent office lights and a valid beneficiary form. The outcome was practical, which is usually where the best revenge lives. The insurance proceeds stayed with me exactly as Mom intended. Jason and Lauren were required to restore the memorial donations in full and sign an accounting statement. The funeral home accepted a structured application of restored memorial funds to the remaining balance, with the rest documented properly. Jason had to admit, at least in writing, that I had paid the funeral deposit and principal funeral costs. Dana prepared a letter correcting false reimbursement claims. Lauren removed her social media posts after one relative asked publicly why the woman turning grief into accounting was also the contract payer. Jason's planned "thank you for supporting Mom's funeral" family dinner that weekend was quietly canceled because too many people had started asking what exactly he had paid for. That, more than anything, wounded him. Not the money. The applause drying up.